It was raining harder than I could ever remember, and the air inside the ambulance smelled like rubber gloves and blood. I clutched my mother's hand, slick and limp, trying to anchor her to me as the medic shouted things I didn't understand. She hadn't responded in over 20 minutes. Her eyes, normally sharp enough to cut through my excuses, were closed like she was already gone. They told me to sit, to keep out of the way. But how do you keep out of the way when your entire world is strapped to a gurney, unresponsive? We carry those we love not only in our arms, I whispered, but in our silences. Madison had never felt so far from safe. I had driven my mother to the ER more than once in my life, but this night was different. This time, it wasn't a fall or high blood pressure. This time, she didn't even know I was there. When we arrived at Riverside General, I didn't wait for permission. I followed them straight into the bay, my boots tracking water onto the hospital tiles. The paramedics moved like a machine, and I hovered at the foot of her stretcher, my fingers still looped around hers, like a child lost in a department store. Then came Eris, my sister. Perfect posture, fresh coat, dry hair. She walked into the chaos like she was stepping onto a stage. Her daughter, Zinnia, trailed behind, tapping furiously on her phone. Even before she said anything, I knew she'd come not for Mom, but for the story. "Hey," Eris said, voice warm but hollow, like a voicemail recorded for strangers. "How bad is it?" "She's not waking up," I replied, barely looking at her. "Well, don't panic," she said quickly, already motioning toward the admitting desk. "I'll handle the paperwork. We need to make sure the hospital knows we're unified, for media liability." "Media liability?" I echoed, finally turning to her. "Just let me manage it," she added with a pat on my shoulder, the kind that says, "Stay quiet," more than it says, "I care." I stayed by the hallway leading to Mom's room until a security guard approached me. Polite, sympathetic. "Ma'am," he said, "we've been asked to reduce the number of visitors in the suite. Would you mind waiting in the general lounge for now?" "Asked by who?" I asked, already knowing. He didn't answer. Behind him, I saw Zinnia adjusting a ring light. She had her phone propped up on the rolling table, soft instrumental music already playing. "Live in 3, 2. "I'm her daughter!" I snapped, louder than I intended. Eris, appearing suddenly behind the guard, placed a hand on his arm. "She just gets overwhelmed," she said softly. "This is all a lot for her." Then, turning only slightly toward me, she hissed under her breath, "Don't make a scene. Not here." I was stunned. It wasn't the first time she'd undercut me in public. But this was my mother. My mother. But the guard didn't know that history. He didn't know I was the one who cleaned up Mom's kitchen last winter when she fell, or that I was the one who paid off her prescription balance when her insurance failed. All he saw was a wet, frantic woman and a composed daughter already taking charge. I didn't fight, I just stepped back, arms limp at my sides. They led me out to the waiting lounge, too cold, too bright. I sat on a plastic chair that squeaked when I moved, my wet coat clinging to my back. People around me looked normal, coffee in hand, whispering to loved ones. A boy limped in, joking with his father. A woman sobbed softly as a nurse held her hand. And me? I was just there. From across the room, I saw my reflection in the vending machine's glass. Hair stringy, eyes wild, cheeks flushed. I looked like a woman who didn't belong to anyone. I reached into my coat pocket, fingers brushing against the folded insurance card I brought for Mom. She'd asked me to keep it, just in case. Apparently that meant nothing now. A couple entered with balloons and a card. The woman kissed the man's cheek and handed a nurse the gift. They looked more like family to my mother than I did. The worst place to break, I thought, is where no one notices. A nurse stepped into the room and called out, "Family of Celine Rowan?" I stood immediately, brushing my coat straight. My voice was ready. This time, I wouldn't be quiet. But the nurse's eyes didn't land on me. They landed on Eris. She smiled and stepped forward. "That's us," she said, draping an arm around Zinnia's shoulder. I didn't move. I didn't sit back down either. I just stood there, like a placeholder in someone else's story. I stepped forward, but she wasn't looking at me. The nurse called for the family of Celine Rowan, and I answered with my whole body, but her gaze went right past me. Eris brushed past, calm and collected, her hand gently resting on Zinnia's shoulder like she was being escorted into a press conference instead of a hospital room. I stood there, frozen. The kind of stillness that doesn't come from peace, but from being erased so efficiently, so silently, that even your own voice doesn't echo back. I used to think being invisible was better than being unwanted, I thought. But now, I wasn't just invisible, I was edited out. I didn't cause a scene, I didn't cry or shout. Instead, I sat back down and stared at the floor, trying to swallow the bitter heat rising in my throat. Not even 2 minutes passed before 2 security officers and a staff liaison approached me. The younger one smiled in that rehearsed way, the same kind of smile you see on flight attendants right before they tell you the flight's overbooked. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "we understand you're emotionally invested, but for safety reasons, we'll need you to wait in the general lounge." "Safety?" I asked, more confused than angry. The woman with the clipboard spoke up next. "We've had reports you might be experiencing distress. We want to ensure a calm environment for the patient." Before I could speak, Eris reappeared, hands clasped, expression just concerned enough. "She gets overwhelmed sometimes," she said in a low, syrupy tone. "And Mom wouldn't want chaos. This is already so hard on everyone." I didn't look at her. I looked straight up at the security camera on the ceiling and said, loud enough to be picked up, "Please make sure this stays on record." Then I stood, quiet, composed. If they were going to escort me like I was dangerous, I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me unhinged. The waiting lounge was colder than I remembered. The lights buzzed with that faint hospital hum, and the chairs were too rigid, too close. I sat near the corner, as far from the vending machines as I could get without standing outside in the rain again. Across the room, a father rubbed circles on his daughter's back. A woman whispered prayers into her phone. Everyone had someone. I reached for my own phone. Cracked screen, barely 10% battery left. I opened the app. Zinnia was live. Her face was centered perfectly in frame, lit by a subtle glow. Soft piano music played in the background. "Our grandma's fighting," she said, voice trembly, but smooth. "We believe in miracles, and we're asking for yours." I watched in silence as the hearts poured in. Comments stacked on the side like bricks in a wall that would box me out again. "This family's been through so much. She's such a strong young woman." Sending prayers from Nebraska. My own name didn't appear once. A nurse passed me, one who'd smiled kindly before. This time, she didn't look at me. Not a glance, not even the tight, obligatory nod. That's when I realized. The whisper worked. The unstable label. It didn't take a psych eval or any paperwork. Just a well-placed suggestion from someone who dressed better, sounded calmer. And now, I was radioactive. A memory flashed. Me and Eris as kids. She'd stolen a candy bar from the local store. When Mom asked about it, Eris cried first. I didn't even open my mouth before I was punished. It never mattered what I said, I thought. It only mattered who said it louder. I took a deep breath and pulled out a pen. Flipping over a crumpled receipt, I started documenting everything. Time of day, names on badges, Eris's tone, Zinnia's setup. Then I unlocked my phone and typed into my notes app. If anything happens, this is where it starts. No update had come about my mom, no nurse, no doctor, no tech with a clipboard, just silence. And applause echoing through a live stream that didn't belong to the woman on the bed, but to the ones who stood closest to the camera. I didn't call Eris. I wouldn't. People don't become trustworthy just because they're related to you, I reminded myself. Just then, a familiar voice broke through the static of my thoughts. "Mael." I looked up. Dr. Leora Hayes, an old friend from a life before all this, before lawsuits and hospice forms and family PR plans. She looked around quickly. "I saw what happened," she said under her breath. "Meet me behind the vending machines. 5 minutes. Don't tell anyone." I followed Leora down a side hallway that led away from the patient corridors. The overhead lights were dimmer back here, like this part of the hospital was meant to be forgotten. We stopped near a locked office. She didn't open the door. She just looked at me, serious. I checked the intake file, she said. Mael, your name isn't listed anywhere. What are you talking about? I asked, already reaching into my bag. I'm her legal caregiver. I have the documents. She held up a hand. It doesn't matter what you have. The system shows Heiress Bellamy as the only contact. You're marked as removed and flagged. Flagged for what? My voice barely kept steady. Leora's eyes didn't waver. It says you were reported years ago as emotionally volatile. That's why the staff kept a distance. They think they're following protocol. I felt something in me slide sideways. A part of me wanted to laugh, and maybe that's why I didn't scream. Of course Heiress would do this. She wouldn't cut me out with scissors. She'd do it with a click of a mouse and a calm conversation over coffee. I pulled out the printed emails I always carried, copies of the 2021 directive my mother had signed after her first major stroke. I'd watched her tremble with the pen, watched her whisper my name while she wrote. You'll do right by me, she'd said, voice slurred but certain. Back then, I thought it was a promise. Now it felt like a curse. They swapped the file, I said, more to myself than Leora. Probably after Thanksgiving, the year I didn't come home. They used my absence like a crowbar. When someone wants to erase you, I whispered, they don't burn your name. They just replace it quietly. Leora didn't speak. She handed me a folder with Celine's current ER intake record. I opened it, already knowing what I'd see. There it was. Patient, Celine Rowan. Next of kin, Heiress Bellamy, daughter. Previous emergency contact, Mael Rowan. Removed. They didn't just erase me, I said, staring at the form. They used Mom's name to do it. They always do, Leora said softly. Because if you question it, you look like the unstable one. I left the hospital not out of weakness, but to retrieve something Heiress didn't know I'd kept. Back at my apartment, I unlocked the fireproof box tucked behind old tax folders and expired renter's insurance. Inside, beneath my mother's poetry books and a yellowed birth certificate, was the original directive, her signature shaky but real. Her words, Mael to have full authority in case of incapacitation. And the date? September 3rd, just weeks before her second collapse. The hospital had a new one on file, dated 5 months later. I wasn't even in Wisconsin that month, and my mother could barely hold a spoon, let alone sign a legal document. I stared at the two papers side by side. One a promise, the other a forgery. They always say death brings out the worst in families. But this wasn't grief. This was theater. And I was no longer in the audience. I took photos, high-res, time-stamped, backed up in 2 clouds, and sent them to Leah, a lawyer friend from my old job in Milwaukee. Subject line, if it goes down, this goes first. I didn't post. I didn't email the hospital yet. I waited. I documented. Every file, every form, every whisper someone might later pretend never happened. They think because I didn't scream, I didn't notice, but every detail is now a receipt. Just as I sat down to breathe, a notification popped up on my phone. I stared at the screen. Hashtag hero, Grandma was trending. With a knot tightening in my stomach, I opened Zinnia's livestream page. The thumbnail was everything I expected, and nothing I was ready for. Zinnia sat at the edge of Mom's bed, tears perfectly timed, hands clasped. Heiress was behind her, holding Celine's hand like she'd earned it. The camera panned right, over the IV stand, the flowers, the space where I should have been. The camera panned right, over the IV stand, the flowers, the space where I should have been. And for a moment, it felt like I'd been punched square in the chest by a ghost. I watched the live stream again. Slower this time. Zinnia's face filled the screen, her eyes glistening just enough, lips trembling like she'd practiced in front of a mirror. The soft piano music playing underneath was the same loop she used when she posted about the trauma of starting senior year late. Her skin glowed under some subtle filter, even in a hospital room where everything else looked pale and sterile. Behind her sat Heiress, poised, solemn, one hand clutching Mom's, the other resting on the rail of the hospital bed. The monitors had been muted, probably to cut out the irregular beeping. The lighting was soft, like a Pinterest board for grief. I paused the video, studied the frame, no IV bags, no wires, no staff in the background. Just enough detail to feel authentic, but none of the clinical truth. It wasn't real, not the way they wanted people to believe, but it didn't matter. The comments poured in anyway. Such a beautiful daughter. This is how you honor a parent. Where's the other sister? You know, the angry one. I stared at that last one longer than I should have. If you say nothing long enough, people will write your role for you. I clicked off the video, but it stayed in my head like a song you can't stop humming. The guilt wasn't even mine, but it clung to me like smoke. My phone buzzed, a DM from an unfamiliar handle. I hesitated, then opened it. Hey, you don't know me, but I'm in Zinnia's English class. Cressida Lane. Look, I don't want drama, but I thought you should know. She cried on TikTok once because her cat went missing. It was under her bed the whole time. She got like 80K views. I don't think she's trying to hurt anyone. But her mom makes everything a scene. I read the message twice, and suddenly, it wasn't about Zinnia anymore. The problem was never just her. It was the whole system. Eris trained grief like it was a talent. Zinnia was just the next student. I stared out the window. The sky over the parking lot was dull and gray, a match to how I felt inside. This family didn't mourn. We marketed. I reopened Zinnia's profile. In the last 24 hours, Eris had gained over 20,000 new followers. There was a new post up, an announcement. She'd been invited to speak on a caregiver podcast. The caption read, "Sharing my truth, one breath at a time." My hands shook, but I didn't cry. I whispered out loud, to no one in particular, "This isn't about Mom. It's about being seen." I had stepped out of the narrative a long time ago. That's when I became inconvenient. I thought back to when we were kids. Eris always knew how to spin a story. She was the one who cried when I pointed out her lies, and somehow I was the one grounded. Me, I was the quiet one, the one who cleaned up after, the one who didn't want the spotlight, just the facts. In that moment, it hit me. Being silent didn't make me strong. It made me invisible. Again. I pulled out my phone, opened the Notes app, and typed, Stage 1. Gather receipts. Stage 2. Pick the right audience. No emotion, just bullet points. A notification popped up before I could close the app. You've been tagged in a video. Estranged sister attacks online grief campaign. I tapped it, knowing exactly what I'd find, and still being surprised. There she was. Eris. In her car. Hair slightly tousled, eyes red-rimmed but dry. Voice soft, breaking in all the right places. "Some people just can't let others grieve," she said, blinking at the camera. Especially when they were never there to begin with. Her voice cracked like she'd practiced it. But this time, I recorded everything. Her voice cracked like she practiced it. But this time, I recorded everything. I watched Eris's video in full, even let it loop once, absorbing every word she uttered in that breathy, wounded tone. Some people just can't let others grieve. A pause, especially when they were never there to begin with. The backdrop was her car. Slightly fogged windows, no makeup, seatbelt still strapped, just authentic enough to sell the lie. I saved the file to my private drive. I named it Weapon Number 1, not out of spite, out of necessity. This time, I wasn't asking them to understand. I was preparing them to regret. After getting off the hospital Wi-Fi and onto my own network, I searched for the GoFundMe Eris had launched. I knew it would be there. It always was. She knew how to ride a wave before it crashed. Sure enough, there it was. Help our family support Celine's recovery. A cover photo of Mom smiling at Zinnia's sweet 16, candlelight hitting her eyes just right. $90,438 raised. Nearly 2,000 donors. Comments like, "Bless you for sharing your mother's journey," and "This family's strength is inspiring." The organizer, Eris Bellamy. I scrolled through every word of the campaign description, paragraph after paragraph about Mom's battle, our family's unity, and our unwavering love through the hardest time. My name, never mentioned, not even a footnote. They didn't just erase me, they rebranded themselves using the space I was shoved out of. Back on social media, #HeroGrandma was now trending, not just in Madison, but nationally. A local news station had picked it up. One of the articles quoted Eris directly. "Grief is never easy," she said, "but our mother taught us that love is louder than silence." What she meant was, attention is louder than truth. I opened Zinnia's TikTok. Her latest post showed her laying fresh flowers at Mom's bedside, lip trembling, camera zoomed just enough to show the hospital bracelet on her wrist. "I'll be strong for her," she whispered. Cue piano music. Cue thousands of likes. And me? I was still waiting for a single nurse to update me on my mother's actual condition. "You can't honor someone while using them," I said aloud. No one heard it but me, and the silence agreed. Then the local press weighed in. A glowing article titled, "Daughter's Love Moves Madison." There was a picture of Eris mid-embrace with Zinnia, the hospital's front doors blurred in the background. Eris Bellamy shared, "We don't expect support, but love is our reward." I nearly dropped my phone. The words crawled across my skin like oil. That's when I dialed Leah. She answered halfway through the first ring. "You ready to file?" she asked. "I don't need a war," I replied. "I need protection. And I need my name cleared." "Then let's stop playing nice." That evening, I went back to the hospital. I didn't engage Eris. I didn't even acknowledge her when she waved to the nurses, handed out those stupid branded pens she had made for her care initiative. I watched her perform, a pat on the janitor's shoulder, a shared laugh with a volunteer. Even the hospital photographer showed up to capture her dropping off a care basket from the family. "You're doing amazing," a nurse whispered to her as I passed. I clenched my teeth, not out of jealousy, but out of sheer frustration. The costume always fits if you've never had to carry the weight. Mom's actual needs, her labs, her therapy updates, her status, none of that was on Eris's list. She didn't care about recovery. She cared about the optics. I went back to the waiting room and sat in the farthest chair from the cameras. My phone buzzed. I thought it was Leah again, but it wasn't. It was Venmo, $12,200 withdrawn. Memo, emergency care, covered by family. The sender, Eris. I stared at it for a long time before whispering, "You signed my name again, didn't you? You signed my name again, didn't you?" The question echoed in my head as I stared at the Venmo notification. $12,200, pulled directly from the joint account tied to Mom's care. A transaction labeled, "Covered by Family," when I knew I hadn't approved a single dime of it. I was still holding my phone when I noticed a nurse running past the cafeteria doors, urgency in her stride. My stomach turned. I shoved the phone into my pocket and followed her. The hallway leading to ICU was clogged with machines being wheeled out, nurses on radios, and one orderly calling for someone from respiratory. A young nurse, maybe 25, met my eyes. "You're Mael, right?" she asked. "Yes." "Your mother's been calling your name." I blinked. "She's awake?" "Somewhat. In and out. But she's asking for you." I stepped toward the door, already reaching for the handle, but the nurse raised her hand gently. "I'm sorry. Your sister's already in there. They asked us not to allow more than one visitor right now." I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just stood there, jaw tight. From inside the room, through the crack in the door, I heard it. Faint, raspy, but clear. "Mael, where's my Mael?" I swallowed a lump in my throat as Eris's voice floated back, too smooth, too quick. "I'm right here, Mom." Another pause. Then, "No, Mael." That moment cracked something in me, the kind of crack that lets light in, but only after it's burned through everything. A staff member passed behind me and murmured, "She wouldn't sign anything earlier, said she was waiting for you." I nodded. Not at him, at the universe. She remembers, even if the paperwork says otherwise. Later that day, after Eris left to make some calls, I returned to the ICU. A nurse pulled me aside just before I went in. "She said something else," the nurse whispered. earlier, when she had a bit of clarity. She told me, "Don't let her take your daughter the way she took mine." I froze. "She meant your sister?" the nurse asked. I nodded slowly, jaw clenched so tight it ached. It wasn't the first time Eris had tried to take something that belonged to me. I remembered the custody hearing like it had happened yesterday. My ex had brought Eris in to testify, said I was emotionally unstable, too overworked to be a present mother. And Eris? She'd sat there, tears barely held back, saying she just wanted what was best for the child. That testimony almost cost me custody of my daughter. Mom's warning wasn't just a memory surfacing, it was a flare, a plea from the edge of her fading strength. Back in my car, I pulled out my laptop and opened a new folder. I named it Celine Truth. I added the nurse's statement as a voice memo. I time-stamped the Venmo withdrawal and included screenshots from the account. Every detail, every bit of proof. They'd stolen money. They'd stolen airtime. And they'd rewritten every narrative I wasn't fast enough to claim. But this moment, her voice calling for me, this they couldn't scrub. Not even Eris could fake that. As I walked toward the parking lot, the sun had dipped just enough to cast long shadows on the concrete. I slowed down when I saw Eris's car, parked 2 rows ahead. Her window was cracked, and her voice floated out into the cool evening. "I told you, the doctor knows not to let her near the paperwork," she said, tone clipped, annoyed. I stopped, reached into my bag, hit record. Not this time. The moment I stepped into the admin wing, the hospital felt colder, not in temperature, but in intention. I had the recording of Eris's voice still fresh in my ear. The doctor knows not to let her near the paperwork. I'd already forwarded it to Leah and to a private inbox I labeled for when they try again. This wasn't paranoia. This was survival. When the game is rigged, I muttered under my breath. You don't play fair. You play smart. I didn't come back to the hospital to beg. I came to gather. Just as I reached the records desk, I heard heels behind me, steady and familiar. I turned and found myself face to face with Vera Sinclair, hospital director. Her expression faltered for a second, recognition flickering behind her polished demeanor. "I remember you," she said, tilting her head. "You helped me keep my license when they tried to scapegoat me after that septic birth case." I nodded once. "And now someone else is playing God with documentation." Vera didn't ask questions. She motioned toward a side office and closed the door behind us. Her posture changed, less official, more human. "Talk to me." I laid the papers down, screenshots, bank statements, the advance directive Mom had signed, the proof of withdrawal from the shared account Eris never had access to. Legally, anyway. Vera reviewed each page in silence. Then, "This isn't about grief anymore. This is policy abuse. And potentially, criminal misrepresentation." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. She picked up the phone. Within the hour, Vera authorized an internal audit of Mom's medical record and access logs. Within another hour, I had access to the visitor registry. There it was, Eris Bellamy, logged 10 times as the sole next of kin, her media passes, her approved social access. I felt bile rise in my throat. "We've allowed media presence here under false pretenses," Vera said, jaw tight. "That ends today." I nodded slowly. All I ever asked for was the truth. Now, I'm demanding it. I stepped back into the hallway, heart pounding in my chest. Not from fear, but the start of something clearer. Near the records desk, I saw a figure approach in dark blue scrubs, Leora. She glanced around, then handed me a manila folder. "Time-stamped screenshots, shift logs, patient entries," she said softly. "And a statement I'm willing to sign." I opened the folder, every line item detailed, every interaction recorded. "I've worked with your sister," she added. "She knows how to play perception, but facts don't perform." I gave her a look of gratitude I couldn't put into words. "It's not that she lies," I said. "It's that she lies better than most people tell the truth." Leora gave a single nod and slipped away, vanishing as discreetly as she had appeared. but not before giving me a tool I never had before: institutional support. That support was tested 20 minutes later. I was talking to Vera again near the admin floor when Eris appeared, like she'd been summoned by bad energy. Her smile was thin. Her tone was sharp from the start. "So you're still pretending this is about Mom?" she hissed. "Or is it about attention now that no one's watching you?" I didn't flinch. "The difference is, I fight for her when no one is watching. You only show up when there's a lens pointed at you." Eris's expression flickered for a split second before the mask snapped back on. Vera stepped between us. "That's enough. This is now an internal ethics investigation. I suggest you both limit your interaction." Eris's gaze turned icy. "You're siding with her?" "I'm siding with policy," Vera replied calmly. "And you're violating it." Later that night, back home, I sat cross-legged on my bed, phone buzzing again. A new message. No contact info, just a link. I hesitated, then opened it. The video loaded slowly, low-res and unfiltered. Zinnia sat in Mom's hospital room, nervously glancing at the door. Then her voice, barely above a whisper. "I don't know what to say. Mom said cry first, then I'll remember the lines." My hand didn't shake. My breath didn't catch. All I did was press download. Cry first, then I'll remember the lines. That was the moment the mask slipped. Cry first, then I'll remember the lines. I played the video again, slower this time. Zinnia sat rigidly beside my mother's bed, lips pressed together as she glanced off camera, presumably toward Eris. The voice that followed was timid, not rehearsed yet, but on the cusp of becoming something practiced. There was no music, no soft fade-ins, no piano keys brushing through a sad monologue, just Zinnia's real voice and the unmistakable sentence that pulled the curtain wide open. Mom said cry first, then I'll remember the lines. Sometimes the lie isn't the worst part. It's realizing how many people are willing to sell the lie for applause, and just how long they've been waiting in line to play their part. By morning, I was summoned to Vera's office. Her assistant looked tense, like whatever had landed on Vera's desk overnight wasn't just an HR headache, it was a bomb. The door clicked shut behind me. "We reviewed the surveillance footage," Vera said calmly. "It shows you being escorted from the ER by request of your sister, with no recorded disruption from you, no signs of instability, no raised voice, nothing." She tapped her pen against a printed still frame from the footage, me, standing just outside the door, soaked, motionless, as Zinnia set up her ring light. "You were gaslit and silenced," she added, eyes locking with mine. "On camera. And now we act." She handed me a copy of the formal complaint her office had just filed with the Medical Ethics Board. "Not tomorrow, not after review, now." I nodded. "Thank you." I barely made it to the stairwell before my phone lit up with another message. It was from Cressida Lane again, Zinnia's classmate. "Thought you'd want to see this," her message read. Attached was a screenshot, a family group chat, familiar names, familiar dynamics, and one line that made my stomach drop. "Let her panic outside. The lighting's perfect now. We need a clean frame for the shot. Eris." The timestamp. 2 minutes after I'd been removed from Mom's room. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was confirmation, time-stamped, typed, and now documented. 2 hours later, Vera convened an internal meeting with hospital PR, legal, and ethics. I sat across the table with a laptop open and a dry throat. When it was time, I hit play. The group chat message projected onto the screen, then the video of Zinnia rehearsing her lines. No one said a word. Even the HVAC system felt like it stopped. Vera leaned forward, hands folded. "Mael, would you like to make a statement?" I didn't flinch. "Trauma doesn't come with a camera crew," I said. "But manipulation often does." Eris was called in 10 minutes later. She entered with her signature grace, heels clicking, shoulders squared, expression fragile and morally superior. The kind you can't argue with because she's already made herself the victim. When shown the messages and video, her first response was expected. "That's out of context. That was just stress. We were exhausted. We weren't thinking clearly." I met her eyes. "You thought clearly enough to schedule a media interview the same day." Vera didn't blink. Ms. Bellamy, this institution will no longer tolerate media manipulation on our property. You are now under internal ethics review. Please surrender your hospital pass before you leave this building. Eris opened her mouth, closed it. For once, no lines came. Outside the auditorium, we crossed paths again. She stopped in front of me. You're just mad because I got there first. I exhaled through my nose. No, I'm mad because you made it a performance. And Mom deserved reality. We didn't yell, we didn't touch, but something between us broke completely in that moment, and nothing in the world could glue it back. That night, just after dinner, a message arrived. It was from Vera. We've reviewed all related access logs. Expect a call tomorrow. The board has agreed to open an independent investigation into all financial and legal transactions linked to your mother's care. Finally, they're going to see it for themselves. An independent investigation? Finally, they're going to see it for themselves. I walked through the hospital with my shoulders straighter than they'd been in weeks, but each step still carried weight I didn't know how to set down. I thought being right would bring relief. I thought once the truth surfaced, I'd feel vindicated. But being right still hurts. It didn't undo the months of silence. It didn't put my name back into conversations where it had been erased. It didn't repair the bonds that had snapped long before paperwork was ever forged. Still, I kept walking, because some truths need to be delivered standing. Later that day, while waiting outside Mom's room, I got an alert from my bank. Overdraft. I knew before I clicked. The same account tied to my mother's care, one I monitored, protected, and funded. Another withdrawal, a significant one, and I hadn't authorized it. I dug into the statements. The line item was linked to a medical vendor, equipment rental for home use, supposedly. The signature? Mine. Only it wasn't. I printed everything, each charge, every false authorization. She didn't just take money, she took the right to choose what that money meant. She took my intention and twisted it into convenience. I drove straight to the billing department. The receptionist was polite but distant, probably briefed already by PR. Still, she handed me Mom's current invoice, paid in full, it said. By Eris Bellamy. I set down my own copy. Same invoice, same total, time-stamped 2 days earlier. I paid this, I said, voice steady. The receptionist frowned, scanning the documents. We assumed the Bellamy name was for PR purposes, the way she's been representing your mother. She turned my payment into her branding, I said, without flinching. And now it's a story she's selling. Out in the courtyard, I found a bench away from the smokers and hospital volunteers. My phone buzzed. Again. Messages from people I hadn't heard from in years. Saw the article. Your sister's amazing. That TikTok with Zinnia made me cry. Tell your mom she raised a warrior. I sat with those words. Let them wash over me without drowning in them. It's not that I wanted to be the hero. I just didn't want to be erased. I called Vera, asked if the billing records could be corrected publicly. The board has begun reviewing every line item, she said. What Eris did may be legally actionable. I'm not after revenge, I said. I just want the record to show I showed up. That night, I got home just after 8. The kitchen was dark. I didn't turn on the light. I didn't pour a glass of wine. I just stood in the middle of the room and let the quiet have me for a minute. The doorbell rang. Not the kind of buzz that lingers, just one press, deliberate. A courier handed me a flat envelope, certified, inside, a letterhead from a law firm I didn't recognize. Notice of defamation and reputational damage, it read, filed on behalf of Eris Bellamy. Attached to the letter were printed screenshots, images from my saved Google Drive folder, the one labeled Weapon Number 1, video titles, notes, voice memos. They weren't just watching me, they were waiting for me to act. So now the truth is defamation. Then let's give them more truth to work with. So now the truth is defamation. Then let's give them more truth to work with. I walked into Leah's office, gripping the certified letter like it was a verdict. She was already leaning back in her chair, coffee in hand, glasses perched low on her nose. She read the first page and smirked. They're panicking. They're trying to shut me up before I speak, I said. Leah flipped the page and muttered, classic misdirection. She tapped the folder. When liars start using legal threats, it's because they've run out of illusions. I sat down. Then we burned the illusions. That afternoon, I got the call. Vera had finalized a public statement from the hospital. It hit their website, newsletter, and media contact list within the hour. We confirmed receipt of payment by Maëlle Rowan for all medical expenses incurred by Celine Rowan. Effective immediately, Heiress Bellamy and affiliates are barred from organizing or engaging in fundraising within hospital premises. A full ethics investigation has been launched. I read it twice before reading it aloud to myself. They finally used her name. Mine. By sunset, the article had spread. Some reposted it without comment. Others added fuel to the fire. She just wants attention. This is what happens when families fall apart. Maybe the truth is somewhere in between. But then came the shift. A former nurse, anonymous but verified, commented beneath one post. Heiress's media privileges were granted years ago after a donation cleared the way for press access. No coincidence. That night, I got a message from a hospital staffer. No name, no greeting, just a screenshot. A $15,000 transfer from a Bellamy-linked LLC to the hospital's PR board fund. That was how she got the private room. That was how she bypassed approval for live streams. That was how she made the hospital her stage. I showed Leah the screenshot. That's influence peddling, she said. Not just unethical, possibly illegal. I took a deep breath. I'm not burning the house down, I told her. I'm putting up floodlights so the mold can't grow anymore. I stayed up most of the night drafting the letter. Not a rebuttal, not an attack, just facts. Every document, every transfer, every login. Heiress had counted on me staying quiet, but I wasn't quiet anymore. I titled the document, Clarification, A Daughter's Record. Then I attached every file, every video, every receipt, and I uploaded it under my own name, not through an anonymous source, not through a whisper campaign, through me. It was nearly morning when the email arrived. Plain subject line, no branding. From the Office of Hospital Board Chair. Re-interview request. I clicked it open. We've seen enough. We'd like to speak with you. On record. We've seen enough. We'd like to speak with you. On record. I stared at the email a moment longer than necessary. I didn't cry. I didn't gasp. I just closed my laptop, picked up the folders, and walked to the hallway mirror. I didn't bother with makeup. I wore a plain gray blouse, black pants, my scuffed flats, no earrings, no lipstick, just the truth, printed and tucked inside a manila folder. This wasn't revenge, it was repair. When I walked into the hospital boardroom, I didn't shrink. I didn't offer a forced smile or a nervous laugh. I sat down, greeted them all, Vera included, and waited until they were ready. There were 2 board members. One took notes, the other watched my face the whole time. Miss Rowan, thank you for coming. Please, walk us through your timeline. So I did. From the emergency room incident to the live streams, the forged documents, the GoFundMe payouts, the manipulation of staff, the weaponized media, all of it. I laid out every receipt, every signature, every video, every silence. At one point, one board member, gray hair, cautious voice, asked, "Why didn't you go public earlier?" I looked down at my hands, because I kept hoping someone in my family would choose truth before I had to. They said nothing, but their silence didn't sting this time. After the meeting, I walked back through the main lobby and out to the parking lot. My phone buzzed before I could even sit in the car. A headline from a local blog, "The Other Daughter's Story Finally Surfaces." I didn't share it. I didn't like it. I just read the last line. She never wanted the spotlight, just her mother's dignity. I smiled, just barely. I didn't need a headline. I just needed space. 2 days later, I got the call. Mom had taken a turn. Not better. Final. When I entered the room, the first thing I noticed was the stillness. No lights, no phones, no cameras, just the gentle hum of machines and the sound of my own breath. I pulled up a chair. "Hey, Mom," I whispered. "You knew, didn't you? Even when they tried to overwrite you, you never forgot me." Her hand didn't move at first, but then, slowly, like an echo of every time she'd reached for me as a child, her fingers wrapped weakly around mine. She didn't speak, but she didn't have to. Later that night, I got one final voice message from Eris. "You made this ugly, Mael." I didn't even finish listening. I deleted it, then blocked her number, her email, every social account I still hadn't silenced. Some endings don't need apologies, just closure. I stepped outside for air. The wind was cold but clean. As I leaned against the brick wall beside the hospital's side entrance, I saw Zinnia walk by. Her eyes were red, face bare, hands stuffed in her hoodie. She paused when she saw me. "Can I sit with her too?" she asked, voice barely a whisper. I didn't answer. I just nodded. She sat beside me, not saying a word. For once, that was enough. Zinnia didn't look at me. She kept her eyes on the floor, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. And for the first time since all of this began, I didn't fill the silence. Sometimes you don't need a confrontation. You need an empty seat beside you filled for the right reason. That afternoon became the last page of a long chapter. Mom passed quietly, without cameras, hashtags, or curated grief. Just me. Then Zinnia, then a nurse who slipped in to check vitals, no rush in her step. I stayed after. Watched the monitors slow until they stilled. I whispered one thing into the air as I tucked the blanket up to her chin. "You remembered me, even when they tried to rewrite the ending." The funeral was 3 days later. It was cold, but the sun showed up anyway. Eris didn't speak. The hospital had removed her from every campaign, every fundraiser. Her glossy Grief Talks appearances were pulled from the hospital's YouTube channel within hours of the board's ruling. The GoFundMe had been flagged. Some donations refunded, some rerouted. I didn't read names. I didn't throw stones. I just stood in front of the chapel and read 7 lines. Some people mourn for applause. Some of us mourn to remember. We show up when the cameras are off. We cry when no one's counting tears. We don't raise money. We raise each other. We don't trend. We endure. And we don't perform. We love. This was my mother, and she deserved real. The room was silent when I stepped down. No claps, no murmurs. Just truth hanging in the air like smoke. Later that evening, Vera called. "The final report is in. You've been reinstated as executor of Celine's estate." I exhaled slowly. "Thank you." She also left behind a small savings. "After fees, the remaining balance is yours." I didn't hesitate. Half of it went to a grief counseling nonprofit. I submitted the donation under Mom's maiden name. No press, no post, just a transfer, and a line in the memo. For every woman who was erased in her own story. Leah, my attorney, called that same day. Eris won't face charges, but her brand is done, quietly dropped by every sponsor, speaking gigs canceled. "She won't go to jail," I said, "but she'll never speak in my place again." That night, I uploaded my own account, every receipt, every timestamp, every video and statement. I didn't tag anyone, I didn't bait drama, I didn't even include Eris's name. I posted it under one title, "The Daughter Who Stayed." And then I logged off. Weeks later, Zinnia showed up at my door. She didn't knock hard, just 2 taps. She held a printed letter in her hand and a face that looked like she hadn't filtered anything in weeks. "I wrote it down," she said. I couldn't say it out loud without crying. I opened the envelope after she left. Inside were 4 pages, confessions, regrets, truths. She'd known about the scripts, the fake tears, the bribes. She said she'd been part of it until she couldn't breathe under it anymore. "I'm sorry," she wrote at the end. "Not for what Mom did, but for not standing next to you when it counted. I won't repeat her story. I'll write my own." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Your mom made a brand out of grief, I thought. But you don't have to inherit it. A week later, I visited the hospital one last time. I walked past the vending machine, the plastic chairs in the waiting room, the hallway where I'd once been escorted like a threat. Same walls, same fluorescent light. But I didn't sit. I walked out through the main entrance, coat zipped, spine straight, and a smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. They kicked me out once, but I walked myself out now, with everything that mattered intact.